Good afternoon, or evening, depending on where in the world you are. And welcome to the Daily Rocket, and more in particular, welcome to the EU Power Rankings show. My name is Shalthus, as always, and we are ready to dive in to another week of power ranking competition. Take a look at how these ranks look and break them down a little bit further. For one of the first times in recent memory, the rankings were actually released prior to this show. So it's been a few weeks since that's happened. Yeah, some big changes as far as the power ranking committee goes. If you noticed on the Reddit post, you also see it scrolling below. Well, not right now, it just went off screen. The committees have changed up a little bit. So no longer do we have multiple or single people doing both of the rankings. We've actually gotten rid of that overlap. So now, it is myself, Doomsy, Mr. Little Thor, DM Rawlings, and Lunation who make up the EU Power Ranking Committee. So every week, the five of us will be providing you with these rankings. That means I will still continue to do the NA Power Ranking show on Fridays, but I won't have that same kind of direct insight that I did with the European rankings, and that I continue to have with the power rankings in Europe. But in any event, we've got a top 10 to get down to. As you can see, the on-the-bubble teams are listed below, so you can see which teams basically came within a hair of making it onto the power rankings based off their performance. It just happened that the other teams above them slightly edged them out. And see, that's the thing with the on-the-bubble position. We rank them, 11 through 15 or 11 through 16 in this case, but the separation isn't quite as large as it seems. Like a team, say Boots and Cats, for example, they're in 16th place this week, technically. They can very easily jump into 10th or 9th place if they have a really good week this week. Because that's the thing that separates these teams, There was some concern as to how the rankings were done, or how we kind of break them down after the fact. And the primary thing we look at when it comes to the rankings and how we position these teams is results. Plain and simple. It's less about how those results happened, so to say, but if you play your game with either your regular team or members of your regular team, then it all factors in basically the same, and we try to consider certain things, but it all still has the same weight. But in any event, good to see everybody here. Let's get down to business with this week's top 10. They're not a surprise, but that's fine. For anybody who hasn't seen the Reddit post, maybe they'll be a little bit of a surprise. Well, let's get down to business. Number 10, Nivea RL, dropping one spot due to a slightly weaker week this week. I said the word weak a lot there. But the fact is, Anivia had still a decent performance, but they were not where they were just this past week. And it's kind of a shame because I thought they were building up a little bit of that momentum that it seemed that they had, and they were showing, especially in the monthly finals against Crown and Jewels. They looked really impressive in that series, but they weren't quite getting far enough this time, and a lot of other teams, or at least the teams above them, started to outshine them a little bit, and that's really the biggest reason that they dropped one spot here. But they are still in the top 10. Their performance is certainly top 10 worthy, and deserving of keeping them there. But as far as it is right now, I would like to see just a little bit more out of what they've done, and a little bit of extra momentum on their part to kind of start climbing those ranks again. Because this is a team that I feel, based off of the little glimpses of what I've seen, against higher level teams or higher ranked teams, are more than capable of breaking into like the top 7. Like, this is a team that I think can go very high here, depending on how they can start building some of that momentum. So hopefully they can recover from this week and get back into the swing of things. Before I go any further, there is one thing I did want to comment on. During Monday's esports wrap-up show, when I talked about the results of ESL NA, I talked about the finals, which was insert sponsor here versus somebody else. Why can't I remember their name now? It's one of those days. I mean, either way, the result was like 4-0 in favor of insert sponsor here, and I thought, you know, looking at it, that it was just a typical, oh, they got blanked, you know, this team got shut out. Wasn't the case. Apparently the team that was opposing insert sponsor here in the finals actually forfeited their series, so they did not actually lose 4-0. They just did not play that set. So, small correction on my part. I did not realize that. I was told about it after the fact. So, in any event, Anivia RL coming in 10th place. At number 9, the Three Musketeers. So they're going to take a bit of a tumble this week, going down 2 spots after basically, again, another situation of the movement around them really forcing them down. And not having the sort of showing that other teams did, or that we would expect. This is still a situation when you get into this lower part of the power rankings. It used to be between 8 and 10, and now I'd say it's between 7 and 10, where movement is so easy to happen, and it can happen very rapidly. Like, a team can go from 7 down to 10 based off of 1 week's results. And that usually doesn't happen in the upper part of the ranking because it's so much closer, and a lot of those teams have kind of solidified their position so well. But we see that down here because there's so much movement. And there's so many teams that'll come into the top 10 and then drop out of the top 10, and all of that in between. So that's why you'll see some really big movement, especially from these lower level teams, just because the competition gets so much closer between these teams. And the ability for, you know, the ability for these teams to potentially beat each other is so much higher and so much more likely. So, in any event, Three Musketeers coming in number 9, dropping 2 spots, just again based off of that lack of solid consistency. So they're another one of those teams that has knocked on the door of the top 7, and in fact I think they may have been really close to that, but then kind of dipped out, at least recently. But once again, they are a team that I have seen. A lot of that, of course, had to do with the fact that they weren't playing with Ring this week, so it affected their wins. That, we didn't really dock them points, so to say, for not performing well this week. It was more about the performance of the teams around them that kind of knocked them down a bit. You know, because they didn't have Ring, Telephone, Ring playing. That's a big, you know, part of their team. So we'll see how things look for Three Musketeers going forward. We know that there's that rumor that they have a new member joining the team. Don't know if that's confirmed yet necessarily, but we will find out. In any event, Three Musketeers in at number 9. Coming in at number 8, Spectral. So Spectral holding on to that number 8 spot for a second week in a row. Didn't play in the Pro League this week. This was their bye week. But they did play in Gfinity and didn't quite make it very far. They lost fairly early in that, so that's really all we had to base it off of. Spectral's one of those teams, though, that, you know, we know that their roster has changed up. They played with Scrubkilla, and I don't know if that's a permanent change. I know that that's going to be the change for the Pro League, but I don't know how permanent that's going to be going forward. But the thing that we've always kind of noticed with Scrubkilla is he's an excellent solo player. He is a very talented player, period. But when it comes to the team game, things get a little more difficult to read. And his ability to play solid as a team player is one of the things that I've always seen questioned by a lot of other players and a lot of personalities, people who watch the competitive scene. So it'll be interesting to see that if he becomes a full-time member of Spectral, how that will change Spectral's recent performance, because it's not been super good. Spectral's been running into some issues lately, and that's kind of kept them at this number 8 spot. So it was a little bit strange to have, you know, a Pro League team fall out of the top 7, but it's hard to justify anything further when they haven't had a lot of luck lately, and they didn't perform too well in Gfinity. So, you know, it's all about the team game. It frankly is. If you play solidly as a team, whatever your strategy may be, you tend to do better than if you're just trying to play as 3 really skilled solo players. You know, you see that all the time. But in any event, Spectral holding down the fort in at number 7, number 8, number 7, Esports Wall. So a huge jump in the rankings for the former Stoic team, they're going to jump up to 7th place here in the power rankings, having a really nice week across multiple tournaments, looking like a very challenging team to beat. Now, Stoic is one of those teams that I've always, when I first started hearing about them, and I heard about some of their scrim victories, and I know that didn't impact their position on the power rankings, but hearing about how they performed in some of their scrims really made them stand out to me. Because obviously they were doing exceptionally well. They were beating teams that, you know, that were well established at that point, getting some solid wins, and it made me wonder what this team was going to be capable of. And Esports, well, then has kind of come into a really good position for themselves, and now holds on to that 7th place. But again, it is a precarious spot for any team. You know, all of these 4 positions we've talked about so far are very tenuously held. Right, whatever. It is extremely, you know, a difficult position for them to be in, because if they have a bad week next week, they can fall right out. So, you know, that's the hard part with this. But for now, the former Stoic team looking exceptionally well, having a great week this week, performed very nicely, and that moves them up into 7th place. So good on them to get this far, but we're going to move on now to number 6, SK Gaming. So SK Gaming dropping 1 spot this week, having a difficult showing against Flipside Tactics, going down 4-1 in the RLC Pro League, and not really being able to withstand the offensive pressure that Flipside can throw at them. Unfortunately, I missed the opportunity to watch the Pro League games so far. I do need to try and get caught up. It's been a busy week, and, you know, not having my internet certainly affects things. At least during the week where I tried to get this done. But anyway, SK Gaming dropping 1 spot. Certainly has had a difficult run lately. They had a nice win over Noble, a small 3-2 win, but couldn't quite get past Flipside, which a lot of teams run into that obstacle. So it does put them in basically a bit of a spot where all they've been able to do lately has been the Pro League. We haven't seen them play in Gfinity or anything like that, and I have to wonder if that lack of competition or that lack of play could be affecting them. We saw the same kind of thing out of Mach Esports on the NA side, the team formerly known as Not. When they played a lot, they did exceptional. But when they stopped playing and focused mainly on Pro League games and things like that, they started to lose a lot of that traction. So I'm wondering how much of that has to do with what happened with SK. You know, we know they lost Yemen, that's been weeks now. But the problem with SK is that they just need to play more. I think if they played more, they should be able to move up these rankings a lot further, or at least look closer to the SK Gaming that we were used to. I think that's the biggest factor here. But, you know, in any event, it was good times for SK Gaming. Still holding on to a pretty high spot on the power rankings, but losing 1 place, mainly due to Noble Esports coming in at number 5. So Noble Esports jumps up a rank, ends up looking like a very solid team, has an excellent showing just this past week, and really, I think Noble's been one of those teams in recent weeks that has looked more and more impressive and closer to the team that we're used to, so to say. Excuse me. You know, the team that I think has been extremely solid in recent weeks, and has definitely made a climb back up into the back into the swing of things. And they won the series against Supersonic Avengers this past week in the Pro League, which big win for them. And something like that, you know, I think, as far as Noble goes, is really something that, trying to find the words here, I know that they're right on the verge of potentially getting a playoff spot in the Pro League. And the way they've been playing lately has looked exceptional. You know, they've been looking a lot better in recent weeks. They've been getting some of the big wins they've needed. They certainly had a huge dip lately that required them to kind of change up their play style a bit and adjust how they handle these things. But they have since gotten back into things, and I think if the situation works out well for them, they might be able to get into the playoffs, but there's a lot of things they need to worry about around them that are out of their control in order to make the playoffs. So, in any event, though, getting that number 5 spot, starting to climb back up these rankings is looking very good for them. We'll have to see how they compete against some of these other teams, especially once the regular season's up. If they don't make the playoffs, we'll have to see how they compete in the tournaments like Gfinity, and if they go to play ESL or whatever it might be, just to see what sort of momentum they can build from there. But in any event, Noble in at number 5. So number 4, MyXMG. For another week in a row, MyXMG holds on to that spot, but just has a very solid performance this week. They end up kind of with a very somewhat surprising result, going 3-2 against Crown and Jewels, a Crown and Jewels team that has been a little hot and cold lately. They were dominating up until they played Flipside, and then they started to kind of lose a little bit of their dominating showing. They had their bye week, which actually went really well for them. They ended up winning 3 major tournaments in that bye week, in the ESL, the monthly finals, and Gfinity. But they didn't win Gfinity this week, and they ended up losing to MyXMG 3-2. So you could make a case that maybe Crown and Jewels should have fallen into 4th place, and MyXMG could have moved up to 3rd. You know, and I feel like they're right on the verge of that happening. Like, I feel like that's a very close possibility for them to take that 3rd place spot. But for now, I don't know. Like, right now, it's a little bit... It's like this close. And when you get so close, the problem now is that you want to make absolutely sure that they're going to move... They are a team that we think could consistently beat Crown and Jewels. Or at least, you know, hypothetically, could regularly beat them. Because that's what these power rankings are about. It's less about how these teams do in an individual week, but more about when we rank them. We're basically saying, for lack of a better term, whatever rank you are, we feel that you could beat all the teams ranked below you, and you would likely lose to all the teams ranked above you. That's not to say it's a guarantee, but that's basically what these power rankings say. And that's basically what their purpose is to kind of keep a week-by-week update that constantly shifts and evolves over time. But MyXMG in a position right now where I think the 4th place showing they have is much closer to 3 than it is to 4 these days. And it's just Crown and Jewels having that ever so slight edge. So we'll see how that goes. But as I said, Crown and Jewels holding in at number 3. So they will continue to be our number 3 team for now. But yeah, like I said, their position is a little precarious due to MyXMG, who has looked very good in these recent weeks, and is in a position right now where I believe all they have to do is win one of their next 5 games in the Pro League to make the playoffs. Whereas Crown and Jewels has actually gone into a position where they could hypothetically, based off of everything that happens around them, finish anywhere from 1st place to 4th place. So they're guaranteed a playoff spot in the Pro League, but they could fall anywhere in the top 4 based off of how they play and how their opponents play. So we talked all about these playoff scenarios, and I've posted the scenarios onto Twitter as to how these teams can wind up this way. But, you know, in any event, Crown and Jewels still holding on, still in a good spot. We'll see how next week goes and how this affects anything, because we know Crown and Jewels will probably play in Gfinity. They're looking to exact a bit of revenge over Perpetual Blackout and get back their Gfinity winning ways. So we'll see how this all goes. We've got, you know, this upcoming weekend to go. We'll play it out and see how it goes. But for now, Crown and Jewels in at 3rd place. Number 2, Supersonic Avengers. So Supersonic Avengers ends up losing this week to Noble Esports, so it draws them a little further away from that number 1 spot. But there seems to be a misconception that my opinion on Supersonic Avengers has changed from 2 weeks ago, and that's simply not the case. Supersonic Avengers, I still feel, is well-deserving of being that number 2 team. I still feel they are well-deserving of being that team that could potentially dethrone the number 1 team. I think that Supersonic Avengers are an incredible team, and they had one off week which I feel did draw them a little further away from number 1, because it's not like they played with some random substitute. They played with Snazky, yeah, he's not their usual third in there. It's usually Maestro, but it doesn't change the fact that he is a normal part of their team. So it still counts there, and I do think that the way these other teams have been playing, there's a potential that their spot could be challenged, because the competition is starting to grow closer all throughout the very top part of the power rankings. And that's not a dig against Avengers, that's more of a compliment to the rest of the competitive scene. That I think it's just getting so much more competitive between one another that Avengers doesn't quite dominate that second place spot, just like I don't think that Flipside Tactics owns or dominates that number 1 spot. I think all of these spots are much closer, but again, Avengers in at number 2 and Flipside Tactics, of course, at number 1. So, top 4 spots this week do not change from the past week, and no huge surprise that Flipside holds on to that number 1 spot. They have been pretty much a solid performer all throughout. They have finished up their Pro League regular season, so depending on how Crown and Jewels does, they could go into the playoffs with that number 1 seed, but they could fall anywhere in the top 3 depending on how things go. But as far as Flipside goes, a very dominating team in a really good position. And there you have it. I mean, that's your top 10. Nothing much to say about that. So now that we've revealed the top 10, we've gone over why they're in their respective positions, let's talk about Q&A. Because we know how it goes, so if you have any questions, now the floor is open if you have questions about the... Oh, Nasty! Welcome back to the Shao Pals. Good to have you back. Thank you very much for the subscription. And at this point, yeah, I want to, again, open up the floor to Q&A. If you have questions about the competitive scene, about the power rankings, or whatever else you may want to ask about, now is your time. So ask away in the chat right now. Yeah, Nasty used to be a subscriber. I guess it fell off, but now he's back. So... Alright, let's see. Do you think Team Rocket would have won ESL on Friday if Wrong Way Woody was playing? Or Sunday, sorry. Hi, Woody. I was surprised that Team Rocket got 3-0'd by Esports Wall. So I don't know what could have really changed that, considering they got shut out. It wasn't a close series. So yeah. They look better in Gfinity. Really pushed Crown and Jewels to the limit. But I think you were playing on Perpetual Blackout, so... Anywho. Favorite player to watch? It depends. Depends on what I want to see. Chronovia if I want some good feedback. If I just want to relax and have fun, probably like Mike or Cooks here or something like that. Do you think Flipside is... Do you think Flipside really are dumb enough to get Woody as a sub? Flipside is a very interesting sub scenario. You know, they have Bipod, who typically fills in for them in Pro League, but they rarely need a sub. They change their name if they want to play with a sub, so they have Perpetual Blackout, which is kind of the Flipside Sans, you know, and one of their members, at least in Gfinity. Hold on, CJ. I will come back to that question in just a second. Oh, Snazky wants to know too. Okay, fine. Let's talk about it. Alright, so, there are parts of what Vogan said that I agree with, and parts that I don't. And I know what Vogan's, what he likes. You know, he likes analysis. He favors people who have that experience and that analytical side that can break stuff down to that degree. And that's great. And I agree with a lot of what he said, that it's certainly very valid and valuable to have that additional bit of insight in terms of breaking down the strategies that teams use and why they got certain results based off of that strategy. And that's fine. But he kind of overthought some of the reasons behind these, you know, the notes that or the write-ups that I do. For one, the thought that I had a complete 180 about Supersonic Avengers because I started to say that their position might be challenged a bit. I didn't change my position on Supersonic Avengers. I still feel that they're a team that can threaten Flipside. I still feel they're that team that could possibly take that #1 spot. And I know they won 3-2 in RLC Pro League, but again, I need to see consistency on that result. And the fact that they lost to Noble, yeah, it was one loss, and I don't give it a ton of weight. I didn't drop them out of second place or anything. But it does tell me that, okay, you beat the #1 team by a single game the week before, which is great, and you showed what you got, but then you lost to a team that was, at that point, 4 spots below you by the same margin. And yeah, you weren't playing with your normal 3, but you still had Snasky, who was officially a part of Avengers, and who's been a part of Avengers for some time. And it's, you know, fine. It was basically like, I don't take anything away from Avengers for losing that set against Noble. And I still, like I said, I still feel they're the kind of team that could take #1. So I didn't have a complete 180. My point behind what I was saying is that the scene around them was getting more competitive. Like, I think my XMG is probably one of those teams, more so honestly than Crown and Jewels, of threatening that #2 spot. And that's less to do with how good or bad Supersonic's playing, and it's more to do with how well my XMG is playing. So that was my purpose behind that. Now let me touch on every point here, because I know that was the first one that was specifically having to do with me. Next one. My comments about SK, and why I thought that they were starting to get their footing again. I have to base it off the results. And frankly, I thought that SK was starting to establish a little bit of momentum. I didn't come right out and say, oh, here they come, they're back again, the best team in the world, they're going to take #1. No, I just felt like they were starting to look a little more secure. You know, they were starting to maybe shake off some of that trouble that they've had recently. And it turns out, I mean, they lost 4-1 to Flipside, which, that's a little hard to read because so many teams can get dominated by Flipside. So I still feel that that win was beneficial to SK. And yeah, okay, maybe it has to do with the fact that both they and Noble played so similar strategies. You know, I didn't slander Noble for losing to SK. I didn't say that Noble looked like a terrible team because they lost to an SK gaming team that was starting to fall down the rankings. By no means. I just thought at that point, okay, maybe they figured something out that's working for them. And okay, maybe they're not going to beat #1 or 2, but maybe they can start getting a little bit of momentum back on their side. And it's hard to tell because SK only really plays during the Pro League. So when their only opponent for a week is Flipside Tactics, that doesn't tell me a lot. So that was my purpose behind that, is that SK looked like they were starting to get a little bit better, and I feel like they were starting to get a little bit better. And it's just hard to read it this week. And okay, maybe that result had to do with those styles clashing between SK and Noble not being able to handle what SK was doing in that similar defensive-minded strategy. And that's fine, you know? But here's the thing. I appreciate what Lunation did, and I think what Lunation did as far as his write-up goes, where he talked about actual strategies and stuff like that, is great. But part of my write-up strategy when I do these write-ups is I try to build a little hype. You know? I try to fan a little bit of how these teams are doing and try to make it seem like maybe their positions aren't so, you know, solid as they may think or as it may look, and this is why I think the rest of the scene looks good. And maybe I need to do better about my write-ups in terms of conveying that message properly, but I think he just kind of overthought what I was saying, and that's fine. I can understand why he did it. I don't have anything against Vogan or anything. I just think he kind of overread what I was writing and just took it as an opportunity to, you know, make a few digs in on me there, but that's fine. Well, I mean, here's the thing with the write-up. I didn't judge Supersonic. I didn't give, like, SK ranking points for one match, nor did I take anything away from Avengers for one match. I just made notes in my write-up about it. And I think I did judge both of them on one match, like Supersonic Avengers versus Noble. I said, oh, it looks like maybe their position is going to wane a little bit. And that was, like, it had less to do with that and more to do with how every other team was doing. But that was one consideration I had. And for SK, I was like, oh, maybe they're starting to rebuild their footing a bit here. And I still don't know if that's the case because they played Flipside, and that really doesn't tell me anything. So I consider the results of every single week, obviously. But for the higher up in the rankings you go, the less important a single week is. So way down at the bottom here, the teams can shift around constantly week after week. Because, okay, maybe Anivia wins ESL. They're going to jump up. Maybe Esports Wall doesn't break the top 8 in any tournament. They're going to fall. You know, that's stuff that's going to happen. But you move all the way to the very top here, and now you're looking at Supersonic Avengers. They have one win against Flipside, a narrow win, but a win. And then they lose to Noble the following week. Technically, a narrow loss. Again, still a very small margin of victory and margin of loss here. So, what do I do with that? You know, how do I weigh that? And I have to weigh it the same because they played as Supersonic Avengers, and it's not such a dramatic change of pace. So, I feel Avengers is still a very solid number 2 team. They are still the team that I think is closest to threatening Flipside Tactics. But just because I said the rest of the field, or at least the teams nearby, could encroach on that spot, doesn't mean they're bad, or that I think any less of them. It just thinks that I think the rest of the scene is starting to get more competitive. So, anyway. Alright, question. Do you think NA is going to handle the EU teams in the playoffs? Cosmic and... You know, it's going to be interesting. I think Cosmic, Urban, and Untethered could make some headway depending on the exact teams that they end up facing. Like, once we have the bracket in place, I'm going to give you a full preview of the entire, you know, playoffs and what I think is going to happen. Okay. If Team Rocket beat Crown and Jewels in Gfinity, but then went on to lose to Spectral, would they have been any higher? Oh, definitely. If Team Rocket had beaten Crown and Jewels, that definitely would have put them in the top 10. And if they had lost to Spectral, it probably would have also helped out Spectral a bit. So we might have seen some collective movement, because all of a sudden, with Team Rocket beating Crown and Jewels, it boosts their power in the competitive scene, and then Spectral beating them boosts them up a bit. So I don't know exactly what it would be. It's too hard to tell. I'd have to look at it from every other perspective, but I think the teams could have moved up collectively, for sure. So, anyway, I hope I addressed that that post properly. But that is why I don't, you know, those particular things that Vogan had pointed out, that's why I mentioned what I did. And that's why I talked about what I did. And yeah, my write-ups are not very detailed or elaborate, and that's because I do this. I give an hour every week to breaking down these power rankings. So my write-ups are more just like quick little snippets of why I put those teams there and how I think they're doing. But then now, we come back, you know, a day later or a couple days later, and I really did dive into it. So that's why I do this show. Anyway, if Comrade Gaming would have beaten Esports Wall in the Esports Wall finals, would they have been number 10? I don't believe we use the Esports Wall tournaments as part of our rankings. We're still in constant evaluation as far as which events and which things we're going to look at from a ranking standpoint. I think I haven't personally looked into Esports Wall, and I'll need to do that, but I remember the last time I had asked about it, we had not done it because they didn't meet our criteria, which basically means that we have to be able to look up all the past results and see past rosters to know how these teams fared. Whereas all the other tournaments we reference allow us to do that, because we need to be able to see the rosters and series scores and, you know, all that sort of finer detail after the fact. So I don't know if that would have had any effect. Probably not. So I don't think it's a big problem, but it also didn't boost up Esports Wall either to win that set. So, all right. The power ranking is less about how the teams do that week and more about how the teams do, like... Okay, I have to explain this a little bit. This is not just a profile of the past week. We basically look at a window that I would say, personally, I look at a window of about anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks of time. Starting with the most recent week and going back, of course. And I use that to just get a general snapshot of how these teams have been doing week to week. And in that collective window. And that's why these rankings don't change so dramatically. Because if they, you know, if these rankings were affected week to week, or just a week by week, you know, breakdown, then last week, Avengers would have been number 1, because they beat Flipside. But that's not how it works. You know, these are power rankings. And what I mean by that is it's a sense of every week we look at how these teams' power in the region is affected. And, for example, the results of each week do affect the rankings, obviously, but we also take into consideration what these teams have done before. So that's why my write-ups, you know, may reflect just that week, but my rankings don't reflect just that week. Does that make sense? Like, last week, you know, I had SK, I think last week we had SK at 5th place. And that was after they beat Noble. And I had mentioned that I thought they were starting to find their footing a bit. But then this week, Noble has a great win against Avengers, and SK Gaming loses pretty handily to Flipside. So with that, I have to, you know, we had to flip the results, because I just felt it made more sense that Noble wasn't, the separation between 5th and 6th was not dramatic. It was only a 3-2 win for SK against Noble just a couple weeks ago. So it wasn't a huge separation there, so that's why the results of that win allowed the ranking to shift. So, you know, again, these are power rankings, which basically means when we put a team in the rankings, we're essentially saying, you're number 4. That means you can probably beat every team below you, and you will probably lose to every team above you. And that's just hypothetically, obviously. But that's why we put them in those order. So, but I hope it's clear as far as what we're doing here each week and why, you know, some things change. The reason that things change so dramatically at the lower end is because there's not that consistency on the lower part of the rankings week over week. Whereas in the higher part, I mean, look, you got Flipside, Supersonic, Crown and Jewels, and MyXMG in the top 4. Those teams have been the top 4 for, I'm pretty sure, the last, like, 3 weeks. So, there hasn't been a lot of movement there because they've so consistently performed to our expectations. So that means that now, when we have a big difference, like, you know, if Supersonic Avengers were to get another big win, maybe over Flipside, or even another small win over Flipside in some capacity, that would definitely put them number 1, for sure. If MyXMG were to get a win over Crown and Jewels, that would put them in number 4. So we'd start to see some shifts there because it's been so, you know, even there. But anyway, all right, I'm trying to get caught up here. Kind of deviating into explanations of the power rankings. Do I play Rocket League tournaments in my free time? No, I don't play competitively at all. That's, you know, I'm bad at this game, so I don't play it very well. Alright, what do I think of Yeezy? I think Yeezy's an excellent player. I think he makes a solid addition to Crown and Jewels, and that's why they've been such a formidable team lately. Scrub Killer. Oh, thank you very much. I mean, you know, whatever. I'll take the criticism. It's only going to get worse, I'm sure. Alright, let's see. Trying to make sure I get all my answers in. Sorry, I'm still just trying to get caught up. Okay. I think I'm all caught up. Do I think Boots and Cats can win Pulsar Premier League for EU? I don't know. It's only been a couple weeks or so that they've been in. I know they've done okay. I want to give it a little bit more time just to get an idea of where they stand. In fact, I want to start incorporating the Pulsar Premier results into my esports wrap-up show so we can talk about those a little bit more in depth. I know it's really heavily NA focused, and that's because of the schedule to it, and that's fine. I guess just, you know, I'd like to see... I need to go back and actually take a look at a lot of that to really break it down, since they're like the only EU team in there. So it makes it hard to do much. But all right, again, Q&A time. We're coming to close to the end of the show, give or take. I can always extend it however I want to, but yeah, if you have any further questions, again, about the power rankings, competitive scene, the game itself, whatever you want to ask, anything, ask away in the chat right now. Let's do it. I would like to see a European Premier League, for sure. And I do like the divisional setup that the Premier League has, because, you know, we said, it's good for other competition. It allows for other teams to have a chance to compete in something and potentially move up and move down and really have a lot of movement there over the course of several seasons. I'm a huge fan of the Pulsar Premier League. I only want to see it succeed, and I've talked thoroughly with Findable Carpet, the guy who runs the thing, and he has good ideas, and I'd like to see it just continue to do well, for sure. How big of a shuffle do I think will come within the following weeks? I don't know if we're going to see a whole lot of movement in the next few weeks, because obviously with the Pro League regular season ending and the playoffs happening, the amount of, interdivisional play is going to start to go down a little bit. So more of these teams will have to start playing in things like Gfinity and ESL and other things to continue that. So I don't know if we'll see any dramatic movement here necessarily, but it could all depend on how the playoffs go. Because the playoffs are also international, that makes it harder to do these kind of rankings as well, because, we can't really judge a team's performance when they're playing against an NA squad. It's better when they're playing each other. But we'll figure it out. Do I think that teams will break up after Pro League? I don't think so. I don't anticipate it. There might be some that do it. I don't know. But none that I really know of that would do that. I think they want to keep going for the sake of other things that are coming. Do I think Kings of Urban are better than IBP Cosmic? Well, I don't know if I would just flat out say they're better. They are better than them some weeks, and they are worse than them other weeks. Those two teams are very closely matched. I would put those two teams at a consistent tied for first place because they go back and forth so often. So, Cosmic will never not be number one. Don't be so sure. Alright, how will results versus NA teams in the Pro League playoff be calculated and for the power rankings? What I'm going to have to do, and this is just going to be my opinion here, I can only tell you how I'm going to rank these teams because I can't tell you how everybody else will. It will obviously be factored, but I'm probably going to take a closer look at how those teams rank in the rankings and then try to compare them a little bit versus how those teams have performed against their opponents and versus how the EU teams have played against their performance. It's going to be tricky. It's not going to be quite as easy as just looking at the head-to-head results and just saying, oh, clearly this team is superior. If a team like, if a team like Flipside Tactics beats Failure to Launch, that doesn't tell me a lot necessarily. So I have to figure personally how I would rank Failure to Launch in the EU scene and how their regular wins and losses have been recently, and there's a lot I need to consider there. So I'm going to worry about that when the time comes, when I know who's playing who and what's going on. But, alright. I saw a question about something else. How close is Rocket League to breaking into a new stage of casting? So I guess you mean how close are we to getting a lot bigger? Hopefully a lot closer than it seems. I don't know exactly how close, but I'm hoping that Psyonix makes their move, whatever it's going to be, soon, and then we'll know from there. I'm sure. IBP will never be number one international until they get a very convincing and consistent set of wins over Flipside. They got one win way early on in the scene, but haven't been able to beat them since, and that's going to be a major factor to them becoming the number one international team. Alright, yeah, I think I addressed that. It's all going to come down to what the next big step is for the competitive Rocket League scene, and Psyonix's involvement is going to be the biggest factor there. Lunation, that's a good point, and not outside of the realm of possibility. I've seen some NA teams that, honestly, the top three NA teams right now, Cosmic, Kings, and Untethered, have been looking really good. And depending on who they end up playing on the EU side in the playoffs, assuming all of those teams make it in, which I believe they will, I think things can get very interesting. And those results can get really close. And I could see You know, I could see Cosmic or Kings moving on out of the first round, because those two teams are likely going to finish 1 and 2, which means they're likely going to take on EU 3 and 4, respectively. That's just, I believe that's how it's going to wind up. So that, you know, that would probably be Avengers and XMG, and that's a damn tough competition, but it could happen. Anyway, in my opinion, do you think playing Rocket League consistently or taking 1 to 2 days break in between your sessions is the best way of improving on the game? Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to ask about this, but based off of what I know from other competitive games, the more you play, and this really applies to Rocket League especially because of how skill-based it is, the more you play, the better you'll be. But you don't want to wear yourself down, because then it'll then reach a point where the quality of your practice starts to become detrimental to your actual performance. So I don't know if a 2-day break is necessary, but maybe taking a day off, or a significant period of time off, or somewhere around there is good. But yeah, the more you play, the better it's going to be, especially when it comes to this game. Well, why don't I just take a huge loan? I don't know. Why not? Why should I just be the one who takes all the financial liability? We should crowdfund it. Anyway, if all the top-ranked teams are going to join ESL again, do you think it'll be harder to judge teams on the bubble or doing good, since they could easily be eliminated in the early rounds? I doubt that these teams are going to all flock back to ESL, so I don't think that's going to be a problem. I'll just put it that way. I don't see it being an issue whatsoever with all these teams going back to ESL. I believe that they would probably, especially these teams here, these teams will probably go to Gfinity before they go to ESL. And they'd be happy with that. I don't even think there are 430 hours in a week, but yeah, 40 hours a week is actually a really good idea, because if you want to, I mean, that's like, here's the thing, that is a pro player's schedule. It's at least 40 hours a week, because if you're going to be a pro player and you seriously want to become a pro player, then like with any esport, you have to treat it like a job, and you have to work and give it that same amount of time. And some players will play a lot more than 40. Like, that's just, I'd say, on the low end for that. Alright, let's see. If Cosmic or Kings has to play Supersonic Avengers first round, that's going to be a quick out. Maybe. It will be very interesting, I will say. I think if Kings gets Avengers... yeah, I think if Kings gets Avengers, they're going to have a hard time. If Cosmic gets Avengers, it might be a little closer just because of the change of strategy. Both of those teams, Kings and Cosmic, play differently, and I don't know if that will change up anything, because Avengers has a very, heavy offensive pressure style of play, and they like to just sort of pepper the net with shots and fire away at things. So, that could be fine on their part. Alright, folks, I have to wrap things up here pretty soon, so what I need to do is make one final call for questions. If you have any questions about the competitive scene, the power rankings, the game, or anything else you want to ask me, now is your time. One more call for questions, and then we're going to wrap things up, so fire away at this time. What do I think about North American teams being able to play off EU results on Sunday? That question was a little hard to read, but I assume what do I think about EU versus NA for the playoffs? And I would say the advantage is clearly in EU's favor, I think. I still feel that EU is the stronger region. But there are certain matchups that I could see being tilted in NA's favor, and I'm going to do a breakdown. Once we know who the playoff teams are and what our bracket's going to look like, I will do a breakdown of that stuff as quickly as I can. I might not be able to do an actual bracket prediction, but I can at least take a look at the playoff teams and figure out how it's going to play out. Alright. Anywho. What about Galactic Lions? What about Galactic Lions? I like Galactic Lions. They do well some weeks and less well some other weeks, so they're having a hard time building some momentum, but they are otherwise a pretty solid team that I've seen get some very big wins. So I like them. Why should an NA team be a team to watch on the EU Power Rankings? I don't think they are. Alright, let's see. Why don't we change what the Pro League is? I'm not going to read that whole question, but I see what you're asking. Why don't we change the whole thing of the Pro League? The Pro League was set up in a specific way to allow for region-to-region play, which I think we prefer. You know, we like the region-to-region play, but we'll see the international matchups in due time, I'm sure. Okay, hold on. Stuff's moving fast. Cosmic can lose first place to play MyXMG in the playoffs instead of Supersonic if Supersonic Avengers gets fourth in EU. Yeah, I mean, it's too hard to figure out. Right now, Cosmic doesn't have first place. If Cosmic wins their series on Sunday, they will get first place. And they don't know who the third or fourth place teams are going to be, so they can't really play to try to get a better seed against a better team, because we don't know how it's going to pan out. Oh yeah, no, not the NA Turbulence. It's literally a team called Tranquility and Turbulence, so. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't want to play either Supersonic or MyXMG if I had to. Both of those teams are going to be tough. MyXMG has been kind of on a positive run lately, and I think they are not to be taken lightly. Neither is Avengers, by the way, mind you. That's not where you want to go, but anyway. Alright, I think I'm all caught up. Cool. I'm going to wrap things up then. I had a wonderful time being a part of this show yet again. I want to thank all of you for the follows. Thank you, Nasty, for the subscription, of course. And just... Yeah, EU will play first, so there'll be a general idea, but I don't think we know how the brackets are going to be set up necessarily yet. I think a lot of that will depend on the result of the All-Star game. But anyway, we're wrapping up now. Thank you all so much for being a part of the show. Thanks for tuning in yet again another week. I will be back on Friday with the NA Power Ranking show. I will try to have as much insight as I can, considering I'm no longer a part of the NA Power Ranking committee. But again, cheers to you all. You've been wonderful, and I will see you again very soon. So, have a wonderful rest of your day. And I will see you all next time. Take care.